Welcome to the SF Gold Nuggets podcast, where we introduce members of the YPO SF Gold chapter through showcasing their superpowers. I'm your host, Paul Maloney. For today's episode, I conducted a brief interview with Dev Patnaik. As many of you know already, Dev is CEO of Jump Associates, a strategy and innovation consulting firm. Dev has so many superpowers that it was a bit hard to choose which to explore. I decided to focus on his group facilitation skills. Having participated in numerous sessions that Dev facilitated, I've had the privilege of witnessing this superpower firsthand. I hope you enjoy our discussion. Oh, and I left a little treat for those of you who stick around till the end. Now, here's Dev.
So Dev, thank you for taking the time to chat with me today. You are my first subject for this podcast. So the goal of this podcast is I have a personal goal, and then I have a goal for what I want to contribute to the chapter. My personal goal is when I rejoined YPO, I was in the SF Gold, the SFA chapter, and then when I rejoined into Gold, I committed that I was going to be an engaged member of this chapter. And so one of the ways that I'd like to be engaged is to showcase and highlight the different members of our chapter. And it's a goal for me because I'm actually fairly introverted, and so it's kind of like this is a stretch for me to do. But what I want to do is I want to introduce each of the members of the chapter through a podcast format, and I want to focus on their superpowers. One of the things that I'm really grateful for being part of the YPO chapter is my ability to learn from other people and my ability to watch other people in action demonstrating superpowers. And you are the reason that you're my first victim is that I have experienced quite a few events within YPO where you have moderated or facilitated, and those have ranged from the stir fry forums. I know we're not supposed to call them that anymore, but the group forums where in a breakout session you facilitated a small group and it was an intimate setting for a relatively short period of time. And then I've also been through full day workshops for the entire chapter. One in a previous chapter wide forum style event, and then the other one was a values workshop where we all brought our families and we stacked boxes, and just a really cool exercise. And so I've been struck by your ability to lead a group through a really positive experience and a really transformative experience. And when I've been a participant in these, so I've actually got to experience it firsthand, there are a number of things that I noticed that made me appreciate the reason this was such a good experience was careful design, careful thought, thoughtful planning, and then masterful facilitation. And so that is first, I wanted to thank you for having learned and grown from being a part of these things that you've led. But I also I'd be curious to probe. I know in Jump Associates, you do a lot of work along these lines. I'm curious to probe. How do you pull that off? Tell me a bit more about this superpower. How do you plan? What are you thinking about? What do you do in advance? What do you do in the moment? And let me shut up and let you jump into it.
No, well, thank you, Paul, and you're very kind, because you are always a joy to be within any of these sessions because you have high acuity. As long as you're with superpowers, you have that acuity to notice what is going on, right? In a pretty great way. I mean, Jump is a strategy and innovation firm. We've been around for 25 years, and we work with everybody from like Starbucks and Nike and Target and you name it across the board, the different kinds of companies, right? And as part of that work, in consulting, the old model of consulting, like the legacy consultants, they come in with like a big thick deck and like and drop it on you, and then you ask questions, and then you're like, turn to page 75, and then they dazzle you with their data, right? And I don't know you need that kind of data. You need the deck in the background, right? That's important for any good strategy work. But people need to get there themselves, right? They need to kind of like master the material such that they feel like the decision is their own, right? And so very quickly, if you want to have any impact, you start creating experiences for folks, right, to help them figure out what to do. Right. The way I always look at it is that, jump is a strategy for, we work with companies that are really good at doing things, right? All the companies I mentioned, Samsung or FedEx, these are great companies for doing things. They sometimes struggle when they have to learn new things, right? That's not what they're built to do. And if they're lucky, they have a visionary leader who recognizes that and says, hey, we need to get some help to learn how to do something different, or whether it is geographic expansion or responding to AI, or like, where is the world going to be? Because, I'm a food company and the people just aren't eating crap anymore, right? What do we do? Right. That requires some learning, and learning is far better when it's experiential, right? When it's active, when you do something and you discover something along the way. And so, and that's stuff that I learned at Jump, and then we use when, there's several of us at Jump who are moonlight as professors at Stanford. We do that with our students there, right? It's like, rather than me telling you something, how can we create the conditions such that you will have an aha and you can tell it to me, and then it'll stick, right? Because then it's your idea, not mine, right? And if those things are in alignment with what we have over here on page 75 in that deck, well and good, right? Even better, right? And it's backed in. So you are right. It is the kind of the thoughtful crafting of learning experiences that leads to strategy outcomes.
How do you, so tell me how you go about crafting a learning experience. If you were to design a new workshop, for example, what are, and you had learning goals that you set out. I assume you have learning goals. At the end of the day, people will be able to do something they couldn't do before.
That's right. At the end of the day, we want people to think X, Y, and Z, right? And here's some conclusions we need to get them to. And then simultaneously, how do we want them to feel at the end of this? Do they want to feel empowered? Do we want to feel them excited? In some cases, is this a strategic wargaming? We want them to feel terrified, right? So that they get off the dime and have a clearly articulated case for change. Like, oh shit, we got to go, right? And so it's thinking about all of those things, right? And then, it's crafting kind of like an experience to that. And there's some basic stuff. And like this is stuff like, even if you don't do what I do, just some basic stuff that anyone could do. Like, number one, don't have people sit for more than 90 minutes, right? Get up, move around, take a break. I think that's the biggest thing to make it easier for folks, right? Number two, think about in each of those 90-minute blocks, or even 2 45-minute blocks, what is it that that you're trying to discover or dig into or find out there, as part of it, being super clear on it, right? And then framing that as, certainly questions, but also activities. Like, what can we have people do, right, that will get them to engage with what's going on, right? So that they'll come out with an aha. I'll give you an example. Let's imagine you were doing some work around some consumer insight stuff. We want to understand what, consumers in China think about telecommunications products. I just make that up, right? The old model is we do all the research, we come back, we drop a deck and say, go read through this, or I'll put it on PowerPoint projection and we'll go through it and we'll talk through it. It's another thing to actually turn that into, first, the most baseline experience. Let's take all of those facts and figures and let's put them up on the wall, like create these giant walls with all of those insights on there. That's the first step. So it's all around you, right? But then number two, get you to do something like, oh, I'm going to give you 2 stickers. And I want you to walk around this wall. You and all of your teammates, you each get 2 stickers. And I want you to go put those stickers next to 2 things that you find really interesting and worth us talking about as a team, right? Now, why am I asking you to do that? For one reason. I just want you to read the goddamn wall. And if you tell people to read everything that's on this wall, they check out, they go start checking on their phone. You hand them 2 stickers and say, go find 2 things that are really interesting. It requires them to read the whole wall.
Yeah.
This is not rocket science. So, but it's just, human beings are distracted. We're sleep deprived. We're multitasking. And so whatever I can do to create activities to focus your attention on, whatever is there. And then thirdly, once you have identified something that's really cool on the wall, right, just ask, why do you find that interesting? What do you what's cool about that? Well, this is really interesting because some of the behaviors that we're seeing there are exactly like the kind of stuff we saw in Africa with Safaricom 20 years ago, and we're doing something with super apps now around that. Okay, right? And then turn and start asking, like, who else is seeing that kind of dynamic as well going on in the world, right? Like a lot of things in life, you know, your goal is not to say smart things, but to just ask simple questions to get them to say smart things. That's the essence of teaching, right? And I think first and foremost, I've always seen myself as a teacher.
How do you come up with good questions?
You know, the best questions are very open-ended.
Yeah.
Right. Like you just did. How do you come up with good questions, right? You didn't know you were going to ask me that 5 minutes ago. You just kind of like listened to what I said, and you're present in the moment. You're paying attention to what I said before, and you followed your curiosity. It's that simple. I mean, I remember this was 20 years ago, 25 years ago. I was being interviewed by two journalists from Business Week, right? And one of them was kind of very experienced, had done this thing for 40 years or something, right? And then the other young guy was very much, you know, like looking to prove himself, and like, and he let the young guy go first, right? And he was just like, so with the rise of social media, how do you think that's changing communication across inside companies? Do you see any, you know, examples of that? Is there like, what do you see as the next, you know, version of social media? And he had such a complicated question. I was like, I don't know. Right, because he was working so hard, you know, to look smart, right? Then his partner, again, decades in the business. Here's literally, you know, the first question out of his mouth. So what else you got?
Nice.
What a great question, right? Because here's all the other stuff that he didn't even know that I was working on or that we're thinking about, right? And so simple, interesting points of curiosity that you just want to know more about, rather than you know, trying to look smart or impress the person or what. It just starts with that, I think.
You know what comes up for me as I'm listening to you say that, and I'm inferring this, but I'd like to validate it, is that you don't always have the answers going in. And, you know, because you said earlier, you know, it's like you sometimes you need to steer people in a particular direction. There might be some kind of change management challenge. You need to get a mindset shift, in which case you have an outcome that it feels manipulative, but you do kind of want to create a shift. But it also sounds like, from what you described there, a lot of times, particularly if you're going in with open-ended questions, and you use the word curiosity several times, you don't necessarily, it's an exploratory process, and you don't necessarily know where you're going to land. Did I hear that right?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Right. I mean, you know, we do our best job when we are acting as advisors, right? And which is like, we are helping you to rethink what you're doing or what's going on or what the situation is, right? And so, I mean, we live in a world right now of like massive information, right? And also high intelligence, but not necessarily high wisdom. Right. And that's like, you know, I was just at the TED conference a couple of weeks back, right? And it's like AI palooza, AI all the time, right? And which is fine. And I mean, in fact, artificial intelligence, this is big, and not big like the iPhone big like the internet big, right?
Sure.
But then, so what do we do about it? What is the right way to navigate that? Now, these are not questions of intelligence. These are questions of wisdom. And that was what I found most alarming coming away from it, was that number one, most people that were on stage or talking about this, you know, did not understand the difference between intelligence and wisdom, to the point that they use those words interchangeably, like they meant the same thing, right? This is not true. And this makes me worried, right? So in the face of artificial intelligence, we need actual wisdom, right? And we need actual wisdom from our leaders, right? Everybody who's a leader today, everybody's the CEO, all the folks that we work with, all the folks that I spend time advising, they have got to upgrade their meaning-making systems, their wisdom, if they're going to navigate AI and everything else that's being thrown at us.
So this is music to my ears, and so I'm gonna follow this thread for a moment. By the way, Charlene Lee in our chapter is writing a book where I believe the topic of wisdom is pretty central to it. So you guys should connect at some point. But could you, you said two words that really struck a chord with me. Well, one of them was a double word, meaning making, and then wisdom. And I think those are related words. Could you define wisdom for me? How do you distinguish it from intelligence? And then how does meaning play a role in that?
Yeah, there's some folks at the
oh, I love it. You're getting the whiteboard.
We'll get over a whiteboard, right? And if we think about this, right, the best explanation I had for this, and we should put a link to the original folks, who did this work. They're talking about the fact that, like, on some level, your brain is a martini glass. But think of it as like this beautiful container shaped like that, meant to hold things. Can you see that on screen?
Yes.
Does that show up?
Yep.
Your brain's a martini glass. And so if you want to hold more stuff in it, there's two different things that you can do. One of the things that you can do is you can widen the glass, right? Another thing you can do is you can deepen the glass. Okay? Widening the glass, think of that as new facts, new figures, new data, new stories, all like that's, that's why this is called horizontal development. Right? Horizontal development is a really crunchy term, right? So what we'd like to use for that instead is learning. Right? I learned new stuff. I learned new facts. We went to a presentation on the future of health, and so we learned a lot of stuff. Right? But separate from all the data on your hard drive, right, is the operating system that's organizing all of this stuff. And that's the vertical axis, right? That's vertical development. That's how do you take all of this data and facts and put it together to come to conclusions, right? Now, the learning experts call that vertical development. I struggle with really crunchy words like that. So let's instead call that growth. Right? And the difference, so this is stuff on the hard drive, and this is how the hard drive is organized, right? Think of the difference on, Paul, play along with me here for a second. If I said, tell me one thing you learned in the last year, what would you say? It could be small, you read a book, it could be a fact, it doesn't have to be huge. What's one thing you learned in the last year?
One thing I learned, there's a guy named Forrest Landry. And one of the things that I learned from him is a metaphysical lens on reality. So I learned that there are different ways of framing the world that are compatible and interconnected, but that are very different.
How'd you learn that?
I learned that by reading his book very slowly and very deeply, and then by interacting and reflecting. I read his book. He's got like a 130-page book. I read like 1 or 2 pages a day for several months.
Oh my goodness,
to get through it. It was that kind of thing. And then I talked to people who were equally passionate about this topic, including the author, and he's become a friend. So yeah, that's something that I've pretty deeply learned.
That is a beautiful example of learning, right? And if I ask you, Paul, like the last few years, I think, and you and I know each other, the last few years have actually been a period of tremendous growth for you.
Yes.
What's one way that you would characterize in how you've grown over the last few years?
One of the ways I think that I've grown in the last few years is, and maybe this is a symptom of that as well, but it's been to step up my social game. So to get out of my own head and get into a dynamic with other people. And then to learn from them, and then to learn for both of us to then learn from the dynamic between us. And as a consequence, that interaction and that dynamic has resulted in reciprocal growth.
I love that, right? Okay, so that's a beautiful example of growth, right? So learning can be something like I read a book and I discovered all sorts of interesting facts. Growth is like my view on the world got bigger, right? It expanded, hence the martini glass, it gets bigger, right? And so this is where, many of us, especially when we're like 10-year-olds or teenagers, we start out very egocentric, right? As Ken Wilber talks about, it's all about me, 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 right?
Mm-hmm.
And at a certain point, you get to what they call ethnocentric, right? It's all about us, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like my team, my family, my company, my tribe, my ethnicity, right? This is ethnocentric, right?
Yeah.
At some level, you might even develop to a level of where you get to be world-centric, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where it's not about us, it's about all of us. Like, how do we get everybody on board,
Yeah.
what we're doing? And then even beyond that, at higher levels of development, you can measure this. There's good, like psychological tests for this. You can get to even a level of what they call cosmocentric, where it's not all about us, it's all about it, all of existence, past, present, and future. What does that look like? Right. And so there's growth that you experience. So you had both learning and you had growth. Now, the trick of it, and this gets to, the whole teaching experiences stuff. If you're going to do learning, right, and most colleges, have good learning that occurs, right? Go to a nice college. And the way that it happens is, the methodology is, we can call it, listen and repeat.
Mm-hmm.
You hear something and then you say, or you're going to read a book, take a test. That's a written version of listen and repeat.
Mm-hmm.
But how do you grow? Like, think about how you've grown over the last few years. It's not by just listening and repeating, right? It's not like, yes, reading and taking notes, that's a great way to learn. But what caused you to grow?
Behavior.
Yeah. It's two things: do and reflect.
Mm-hmm.
Do something that pushes you out of your comfort zone, but then doing it isn't enough. Then take the time to go, like, what the hell was that all about? and analyze it and make meaning of that.
Yeah. Yep.
So learning is about listening and repeating. Growth is about doing and reflecting. And oh, by the way, look at the shape of this. As the martini glass gets wider, greater growth increases your capacity to learn even more.
Yeah.
An operating system upgrade increases the capacity on the hard drive.
I like how you invoked Ken Wilber's work as well. It's like breaking out of egocentrism and recognizing a part of a larger transcendent whole. And it's actually it might be a nice place to wrap, because it brings us full circle with where you started, right? When I asked you about your facilitation of workshops, you were quick to point out that you create conditions in which people bring their own agency and as a consequence, like, come along a journey and they grow and learn in the process of going through that experience, as opposed to and you distinguish that from the deck, right? The epitomal PowerPoint deck that consultants rely on, which is quickly getting disintermediated by artificial intelligence, by the way. Like, what you bring to bear is timeless and it's human, as opposed to the PowerPoint slides, which are static. But the spirit behind what you were after is you're creating the conditions in which growth and learning happen, as opposed to teaching. It's that I think it was Yeats who said, teaching isn't filling a container, it's lighting a spark. Yeah. Right. So it's like you're not imparting knowledge, you're creating conditions in which people can thrive and learn.
That's exactly right. If we do that, we can solve all these crazy challenges that companies have, that countries have, that societies have, right? But it starts with your capacity to learn and grow.
I think that's a nice place to wrap.
Likewise.
Thank you, Dave. I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with me. And your success at Jump is no surprise. So I appreciate the opportunity to learn and grow from you. And thanks for taking the time to chat with me today.
Always a pleasure to hang out with you, Paul.
So I promised a little treat for those of you who stuck around till the end, and here it is. This is when we first started the conversation. Have a look at Dave's background. So one of the things that Dave did, the first thing that Dave did was say, you know what, if we're going to record this and send this out to our chapter, let me get a better setting and a better background. And you see that he moved to a location that had sort of a nice view in the background, as well as a whiteboard ready at hand to make our conversation a better experience and to make your viewing of this a better experience. So the man walks the walk.